I'll be hosting here Professor and lawyer Toni Jaeger-Fine. It will be a pleasure for us to hear from her about, LL.M programs in the US. She has been a very, I'd say, a very good friend of Brazil for a while now. So she has a lot of connections in our country and with law firms in Brazil and with lots of Fordham law alumni who come from the country. And I'm sure she will be able to share a little more about her experience with Brazilians. So I'm very excited to have her here tonight and to, just understand a little bit of her perspectives on LL.Ms for Brazilian students. I know she will be able to give us lots of advices and also share with us how the program works at Fordham in New York. Just a few minutes earlier, she was just sharing with us how she's in New York City right now and has a beautiful weather there. So I'm very excited about tonight. Please feel free to send in your questions through chat, as well as to open your camera and just raise your hand and make sure that you might want to know more about. So thank you guys for joining us. And Professor, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Klaus. And please call me Toni, and that invitation goes to everyone on the call. This is going to be very, very casual, very informal. As Klaus said, I really hope that you will ask questions. I would encourage you to turn your camera on if you have sufficient privacy and sufficient bandwidth, and if not, that's okay. But it's always so nice to be able to see your faces. I'm really, really honored to be here. I met Klaus a week or two ago, and he told me a little bit about this initiative of his, and I'm so impressed. And I just want to tell you a little story that goes to the point that Klaus made about my relationships in Brazil. I have many, many, many Brazilian friends and colleagues and students and former students. And one of my dearest friends is a guy named Amadeo Ribeiro, who is the partner in charge of the Matos Filho law firm office in New York City. And he's a great friend of mine and a great colleague. And he always told me that one of the things that Matos Filho encourages their junior associates to do as they move up through the associate ranks towards partner is to build something. And so when I met Klaus and he told me that he had built this organization that tries to inform people about study options around the world, I just thought, I thought right away of Amadeo saying, build something. And so I repeat that to my students very often, whether it's, build something like this, which is a pretty ambitious thing, or a smaller program for mentoring younger people, or for sharing your ideas or sharing your abilities with people who are less fortunate. Building something is always such a great thing to do. And I really, really appreciate the invitation, Klaus. I'm going to share my screen with you. And I have a short PowerPoint presentation, but as I mentioned to Klaus earlier, what I really, really want this event to be is a conversation. So I will go through what I have to say. It's not very long, it's not very extensive. And as Klaus said, you can just unmute yourself, or you could put a question in the chat anywhere along the line. If I see the question, I will stop. If you are not comfortable speaking or writing in English, I'm sure that Klaus can do the translation for you, or I might be able to understand the question, probably not. But we could also have questions at the end. So this is my name and my email address, and I have that there as really an open invitation to any of you to reach out to me later with any questions you have, if you want to follow up, if you want additional information. What I want to do, as Klaus said, is talk generally about LL.M programs in the US, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the programs we have at Fordham Law School that are designed for international law students. So I'll start with the real basics. What is an LL.M program? It's a master level degree. It's a Master of Laws. And there are a lot of different kinds of programs, but I can categorize them as either sort of general LL.M programs or more specialized LL.M programs. Which is better? There's no such thing. It's just so that you know when you're looking at LL.M programs, you may see, for example, Columbia, which is also here in New York. Columbia just has an LL.M. Whereas Fordham, and I'll show you this later, Fordham, for example, offers 9 different areas of specialization. So it's really up to you whether you choose a general or a specialized program, but you'll see both. And, there's no real meaningful difference. I would say that if you have a very, very specific interest in a field of law, and I'll talk about this in a moment, you want to probably look at either a general LLM that offers a lot of courses in that field or a specialized program that is focused on that particular area. The LLM is a one-year full-time program. Now, most of our international students study the LLM on a full-time basis because most such students are here on a student visa. And in order to get a student visa, you have to be a full-time student. It begins, every school in the US that has an LLM program starts the academic year in August. There's construction somewhere in the building, so if you hear some banging, it just so if you start in August, which is a little bit of a weird time probably for Brazilians to start and other people from the Southern Hemisphere, you would finish in May. We're just about to finish. In a couple of weeks, we'll have graduation. Some schools, including Fordham, offer the option to begin in January. And in that case, you would go through December. And a big part of the reason why we started a January program was because people from the Southern Hemisphere, and my interest was in particular in Latin America, it's just a more normal sort of starting point for you. So some schools, but not all schools, allow a January start. By the way, I will say something about the January start that makes me, I don't play favorites, I like them both, but there's something very appealing about starting in January, and that is that you have a 3-month, 2.5 to 3 month summer. And during that summer, you could go home, right, and work or just visit with family, but you could also stay in the US and try to do an externship. Or if you're a person who has some sort of academic agenda, you might be able to stay and write an article. You might be able to be a research assistant for a professor. There's a nice big gap where you could do something a little bit out of the ordinary. Where can you do your LLM? Well, there are LLM programs throughout the United States. And when I say throughout the United States, I really mean throughout the United States. We have, bless you, almost 200 law schools in the US, and I would say at least half of them offer an LLM program. So if there's some place you want to go in the United States, chances are there's an LLM program there, or I should say there's a law school that offers an LLM program there. Now, there are a couple of resources that you could look at specifically. One is the LLM guide, and Klaus, I could send you this PowerPoint later if you'd like to share it with the people who are on the call. This is a link. If you were sitting in front of the screen, you could click it and it would get you to the page where there's a list of LLM programs. And the American Bar Association, which is sort of like but different from the OAB, also has a list by subject areas. So, and by the way, if you are interested in asking me specific questions, even if it's not about Fordham, I'm happy to help you identify schools that might be good for you if you were on this call. So how do you decide which school to choose? Okay, there are so many factors. I list a few here, and only a few, because there are so many things that might be of interest to a particular person. I'll just give you an example. I know people that studied somewhere in the US during high school, and they have a host family. And they say, well, if I go back to Colorado or wherever my host family was, I can live with them for free. Or I can't live with them for free, but they're close friends. They're like family to me, and I want to be near family. Or maybe I have real relatives in the United States. So there are a million different reasons why you might choose a particular place. But here are some of the factors that I think pretty much all of you should be thinking about. One is, oh, sorry, I have it twice. I'm noticing, terrible, I'm sorry. One is the program of study, okay? And that's obviously really important because when you're an undergraduate, you sort of study the full range of subjects. By the time you get to your master's degree, you really usually want to focus on something. Now, it may be that what you want to focus on is you want to learn the general elements of US law, and then you might look for a program in an LLM in US law, but you want to be sure that it's going to be the kind of academic program that you want. Maybe you want to study corporate banking and finance law. Well, Fordham happens to be very strong in that, but there are many other schools that do not have a lot of strength in corporate banking and finance law. And so you would want to, take account of where the subject or subjects you're interested in studying are being offered. Location. I think location is really important for a couple of reasons. One is you want to enjoy this year. This year is kind of a break for you, right? It's perhaps the 1 year in your life that you'll be out of Brazil. I should warn you that sometimes people do meet people and they end up getting married and staying in the US, or that person is from another part of the world and they go with them to that other part of the world. That happens. But it could be for most people, you'll come, you'll spend a year, maybe 2 years in the place where you do the LL.M. And then very, very often you'll go back home. So you want to choose a place where you're going to enjoy living, but you also want to choose a place, I think, where you want to accomplish other goals that you'll have. So your goal might be to network. And I think networking is a really important goal. Why? Because when you go back and work at a firm in Brazil or wherever you end up, you want to be able to say, I know a bunch of US lawyers doing XYZ. I also know a bunch of lawyers from various European countries, from South Asia, from East Asia, from all over Latin America, and so on and so forth. So the advantages that are offered, I think, in an urban setting are pretty different from those in a non-urban setting. I will tell you that I myself studied law at Duke, which at least at the time was not an urban setting at all. It's in North Carolina, and that area where Duke is has been greatly developed in the last couple of decades, but it's not New York, right? So it really depends on what you want, both personally and professionally. There might be professors that you want to work with. It might be that you met some professor, or you've been, you're an expert in intellectual property law, and you've been reading the work of Janet Freilich, and you find out that Janet Freilich is a professor at Fordham, and you go because you really want to get to know more about Professor Freilich and her work. It could be the size of the program. Now, programs vary quite a bit, from relatively small, maybe 15 or 20 students, to, I was talking to a friend of mine who runs the LL.M program at Columbia yesterday, and their program is about 320, and I'm not sure that's the largest. NYU is a quite large program. Harvard program is very large. Georgetown is quite large. Fordham is relatively large, but not as large as that. And so this may or may not matter to you. I would prefer not a tiny program, again, because of the networking. And so when you leave, if you're in a program with 15 or 20 students, certainly they will become very, very close to you. But the range of that group will, by definition, be more limited. But again, that might be something that you really crave. If you went to USP or some other enormous public university in Brazil, you might really want a smaller, more communal environment. The prestige of the law school is something that is relevant to some people and less relevant to others. I have a wonderful student who right now who graduated at the top of her class from the University of Buenos Aires. She then went to London School of Economics. She works at a top British firm. And she said, I got into some of the very elite schools, but I don't really care anymore because I've sort of done all that. I work at a top firm. I have all the, top schools. She comes to Fordham, which is not a very, very elite school. It's a top school. Some people say, I only want to go to a top 5 law school. Okay, I want that Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Stanford, nothing else will do. You have to decide for yourselves whether that's particularly important to you. For me, I think it's a factor that you should consider, but it's not necessarily the most important factor. I think it's much more important that you go to a place where the program of study is the one that you are interested in. You want to look at extracurricular and for that matter, curricular opportunities, I should say. So one of the things that students can do at Fordham that they can't do at every school is they can join one of the law journals. This is a very sort of uniquely American kind of experience to join one of the journals. And this is something that a lot of people are really interested in doing. Not all schools open their journals for LL.M students. What about externships or internships or clinics? Again, Fordham offers those opportunities to LL.M students. Not all schools make those available. So you want to make really, really certain that you ask the questions about what matters to you. The final element I put here is cost. Now, you might be thinking cost is the number one thing. Why did she put cost all the way down at the bottom of the list? I put cost down at the bottom of the list because I think you should make your decision about where you apply based on other factors and work out the cost at the end. I see the cost not so much as a restriction it's a challenge. It's something you have to deal with. US law schools right now are very, very generous with scholarships. There are other means to get scholarships and funding to do your study abroad, to do your LL.M. One thing I always recommend that people do is contact the US embassy or consulate close to where you are, because the consulates and embassies really know a lot about funding opportunities for people from your region. There's also Fulbright, and there may be all sorts of other organizations. But I think that while cost, of course, is important, it shouldn't guide your decision about where to apply, although it might sort of have an impact at the end. Vinicius asked about the journals. What's this about journals? So in the US, we have a very unique, and I'm not sure there's any kind in the world that does this the way we do. So you have law journals in Brazil, and as far as I know, they're mostly or all published by private publishing houses. In the US, most of the law journals, almost all of the most established and distinguished and prestigious journals are actually published out of the law schools. This is odd, right? But it seems to work really well for us. I don't know why no one else does it, because students provide tremendous free labor. What's odd about it is that, if I were to write an article and I wanted to get it published in a US journal, I would have to send it. I could send it to multiple journals at the same time, and it would basically be up to some second or third year law student to decide whether to publish my journal. And this is true not only of me, it's true of the most prestigious professors that we have in the United States. They've published for their entire lives. They're the most sought after scholars, and they have to actually get their journal, get their article accepted for publication by a second or third year law student. And Claudia mentions, for example, the Harvard Law Journal. Yeah, that is one of the most prestigious journals we have in the US. Every law school that I know of has at least one journal. In the case of Fordham, just as an example, we probably have 5 or 6 journals. Sort of a general interest journal called the Fordham Law Review, just like the Harvard Law Review. And then Harvard, for example, has the Harvard, I believe, Legislation Law Review or Legislative Law Review. We have an IP journal, we have an urban law journal, we have a corporate law journal. And so that will also give you some insight into the areas of specialization or specialty at a particular law school. Now, what about non-US programs? Let me say a couple of things. And I was with a firm in Brazil last week or 2 weeks ago with a partner from Cleary Gottlieb. And here's what I said about non-US programs. Do not go to Portugal, okay? Why? You already know Portuguese language, even though it's a little bit different there. You already know the civil law system. What you want to do with your master's, I think, is do something really different. So learn about the common law system, learn about legal English, learn about a system that the clients you're going to end up working with are going to be working within. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So I feel pretty strongly that unless there's a really, really compelling reason, you should try to do your LL.M. outside and LL.M. outside of Brazil, outside of Latin America, and with an exception, I'll tell you what the exception is in a moment, outside of continental Europe, right? So you might say, okay, I won't go to Portugal, I'll go to Spain. And again, it's more of the same. You already probably know how to speak Spanish pretty well. You already know the civil law system. Not saying the Brazilian and Spanish legal systems are identical, but they have many similarities. Do something different, learn a different system, learn, for example, the common law. By the way, the caveat is, if you work at a firm that does, for example, a lot of French law, or a lot of German law, and you really need to understand German law or French law or whatever, then that might make sense for you to go to Germany or France. But barring something like that, I strongly believe that you should do a non-continental Europe, non-Latin American LL.M. Now, there's also the UK, okay? And there's other places that teach common law, India to some extent, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia, there's Singapore, there's lots of places, Hong Kong, where you could go and get a common law education. In my view, and it's obviously a little bit biased, but in my view, US legal education is still the gold standard. And my guess is that geographically, because you're in Brazil, When you're doing international work, you're going to be working a lot with US lawyers and with US clients, which gets me to the next point, which is when. Okay, when should you do the LLM? Should you do it right after law school? Should you do it after 15 years after you graduated law school? Something in between? I think at the end of the day that this is a really personal decision. And there's a lot of factors that could influence this, like your family situation, right? You may be planning to marry soon. You may be planning to have children soon. That may complicate things. Now, it may not. It may be that your partner wants to come to the US with you, right? And that works really well, or that it's somehow feasible for you to bring a child. But having another person in your life, having a child, does complicate the question. Now, I know many people who have come with babies, young children, and they've thoroughly enjoyed the experience. It's up to you to figure out whether that's something that you could manage or whether that starts to get too complicated. So the first thing is, this is a personal decision that will involve a whole range of factors that I couldn't possibly imagine. Now, I would say that otherwise, there's a couple of things to consider. First, that some experience is helpful. It's helpful first in understanding what you're going to learn. So if you're sitting in a corporations class at Fordham Law School and you have come right out of your undergraduate study, now I know you have internships and things and traineeships along the way, but if you don't have any real full-time experience, you may not be able to contextualize what you're learning as much as, say, a person who's worked at a law firm for 3 years after she graduated. So I think that the experience that you can get working at a firm or in a company or even in government for a while can help you understand and contextualize what you're learning a little bit better. Second is, if you've worked a little bit, a pause is very, very nice, right? And so you may think after studying that it's just easier to go right into more studying, and that may be true. But I have to say, as a person who's been working for a while, I would love a break. And if I could have a break to just sit and think and reflect on what I've been learning and what I've been doing, that would be an amazing thing. And when I met last week with the law firm and with this colleague of mine from sorry, I said Wilkie before, but she's from Cleary Gottlieb. She also thought that this is just a great opportunity to take a break and really reflect on what you've been doing and where you want to go. And the third point is very, very practical, which is the more experience you have, chances are the higher your scholarship will be. So I'm on a committee that helps designate scholarships for incoming students, and your application is definitely more attractive if you have more rather than less experience. Okay, now having said that, don't wait too long, because there is a point, and I'm not sure what that point is, but there is a point when it's very difficult to leave. The law firm can't do without you. Okay, it may be very hard for you to imagine right now, if you're very junior, that the law firm couldn't do without you, but there is a point at which you're supervising too many people, at which you're too involved in the client relationship, at you're too central to the knowledge base of the law firm in a particular practice area, that they really can't afford to let you go. And so what I would do is do work after graduating, unless, again, it really makes sense for you to come right away, in which case you should come. But have conversations with people in your practice group, the partners that you work for, the senior associates that you work for. Get a sense of when they think is the right time, because they can help guide you on this. Let me just say a couple of words about the admissions cycle. For a program that starts in August, some schools will have an application deadline that's as early as October or November the year before. So sort of 9 or 10 months before you would even join the LL.M program. Some schools like Fordham are more flexible. We always try to be more flexible. If you apply a month before school starts, we're going to do our best to make it work for you. But some schools are very, very rigid. And so just be aware, and the fact that you're on this call suggests that you're thinking through these issues. Be aware that you want to think this through well in advance, so that you don't, I very often get calls from people and they'll say, I can't believe it. X school was my first choice, and I noticed that their deadline just passed. Well, that's bad, right? Because then you have to either wait a whole year to figure it out, or you have to give up your sort of dream school. So the fact that you're on this call is great. Be aware that October, November, you could see some deadlines for the following August admissions. How do you get admitted? Most law schools do their admissions through something called LSAC. Again, this is a live link here, and when I provide this to Klaus, you just click on it and you get access to it. It's the Law School Admission Council, and most schools now, I believe, pretty much are requiring applications to go through LSAC. It's sort of a document assembly service that you send your stuff, right? Your transcripts, your TOEFL results. Talk to you about the components of an application in a moment. You send it to LSAC, and then you tell LSAC, I'm interested in the following schools, A, B, C, and LSAC then sends your file to us. Some schools still allow a direct application. For example, Fordham, we don't put this on our website, but if you're a friend, and if you're on this call, you're a friend, you just send us an email and say, I'm really only interested in Fordham, or I'm interested in Fordham and one other school. Can I apply directly? And the answer will be yes. And we'll send you a form that will make it a little bit, maybe be a little bit easier if you're not applying to a lot of schools. And it will make it a little bit cheaper because LSAC, of course, charges a fee. So what are the components of an application? This will vary a little bit from school to school, but for the most part, it's the same. One is, so that was my first gift to you, is you can apply directly through us. There's an application form. Every school will have a form, and it asks basic information, nothing too difficult to fill out, you know, your name, your address, how we could reach you, where you were born, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. Your transcript, any university level transcript. So you may say, well, I went to that school, but I didn't finish. We still need a transcript. Or I went to that university, but it wasn't for law, and then I changed to law. I was studying whatever, we still need the transcript. A TOEFL or IELTS score, or we are now accepting the Duolingo score to make it a little bit easier to take it from home, so there's a lot of flexibility. We're looking for about 100 on the TOEFL, about 7.0 on the IELTS. I forget what we're looking for on Duolingo, but you can, there's basically a chart that equivalates the 100 on the TOEFL with the Duolingo. Let's say you get a 99. Let's say you even get a 90. Okay, is it the end of the world? No, it's not the end of the world. Certainly not at a place like Fordham. If we like the rest of your file, we'll call you up and we'll say, let's chat on Zoom or on Skype. I don't think anyone uses Skype anymore. Well, let's chat and see how your English is, because we know that these tests are imperfect. We know that some people do very well on them and their English is not very good. Some people do not do well on them for various reasons and their English is very good. So we are very flexible. We need your resume or your curriculum vitae. In the US, we use a resume, which is a really pared down version of a more traditional CV. It's pared down in a number of respects. First, that we put no personal information on it. So in a traditional CV, you might have your parents' names, you might have your date of birth. I've seen people put driver's license or political parties on the CV. None of that. We don't want to know. We really don't want to know your political party. We really don't care about your driver's license. We really don't care where you went to high school. We care about what's your name, how we can reach you, what you did in terms of education, and what you've done in terms of your professional work. There are specific ways of doing this. I don't want to get into it in too much detail now, but we could talk some other time about how you do a US style resume. In admissions offices at LL.M programs, we're used to seeing CVs. So it's not like if you send a 3-page CV and you're 20 years old, we think, wow, that's weird. Why do they have their parents' names on this? We know what it looks like, but I would urge you to think about one thing. If you're thinking of coming to the US eventually, and sooner rather than later, you do need a US style resume. Why? Because you're going to meet someone who might be able to offer you an internship opportunity, and they're going to say, send me your resume. At that point, you really need a US style resume. So I would say, when you have a moment, put your resume in US style. Again, we could talk about that some other time. There's lots of information online. It's much more concise. Your resume should generally be 1 page, whereas your CV might be longer than that. It should be so that I could look at your resume in 30 seconds, get a sense of who you are. And so I'll leave it there for now, but you should look into that. You need 2 letters of recommendation, sometimes 3, depending on the school. I would say that the best letters of recommendation are from people who know you best, right? So I will say, I'm going to get to Venetia's comment in a second. Because we have something like that too. So don't let me forget. Look, I think in the US, the letter of recommendation means something very different from what it may mean in many Latin American countries. I was told, for example, in Mexico, and I don't know if this is true elsewhere, that a letter of recommendation is just kind of something you check off. It's not an important element of the application. Here it is an important element of the application. You don't want an email, you don't want a letter of recommendation that says, I know Vinicius, he's a very nice guy, comes from a good family, I trust him wholeheartedly, you should admit him to your LL.M program. No, you want a letter of recommendation that goes deep into Vinicius's character, workability, habits, professionalism, so on and so forth. So whether it is a professor or a supervisor at work, you definitely want someone who knows you well and who can speak very, very specifically about your academic and or professional abilities. So Vinicius asked a question about a sort of pre-LL.M program, and a number of schools have those. Fordham has one, and you know who's taking this program right now is Bruna Marchi, who runs this Descomplicando Inglés Jurídico. Okay, so Klaus is going to translate, okay? I don't know how to say it.
That was perfect. It was very good, yeah, definitely. Então, tem uma companhia chamada Descomplicando Inglês Jurídico, e aí a CEO, né, a fundadora da companhia, ela é estudante aí desse programa de Fordham.
Now that was perfect, Klaus. Thank you. Bruna is in this program right now. It's called the Legal English Institute at Fordham Law School, and I will talk about it a little bit later. We designed that program specifically for two groups of people. One is people who are a little uncertain about their ability to do the LL.M, and the other is people who can't do the LL.M. They can't afford it. They can't spend a year away for family or business reasons or whatever. And so we will talk about that a little bit later. I agree, Vinicius, it's a great idea to consider one of those programs before starting the LL.M, just as a way of getting your feet wet and feeling a little bit more comfortable with the language and the vocabulary and the style of teaching that we have. The last part of the application component is the personal statement. And I've seen lots and lots of people get very anxious about the personal statement. Here's what I'll say about the personal statement. It should be well written. It should not have too many grammatical mistakes. It should not have spelling mistakes. But do we expect it to sound like it was written by a member of the Supreme Court of the United States? No. Do we expect it to be perfect? Do we expect it to be native English? No. We're in fact highly suspicious of people who come in with a 95 TOEFL and a personal statement that I could never have written in a million years, okay? Write your own statement with its flaws. It should be well written in the sense that it should be organized and disciplined and thoughtful. Don't worry so much about what you say. Look, the assumption is that you've done interesting things in your life, but that you have not negotiated world peace, written a Nobel award-winning book, run a company or anything else, okay? So don't feel anxious that you haven't done something so extraordinary, okay? Let us see a little bit of who you are. Let us see that you know how to put a couple of paragraphs into an essay, and don't spend a lot of time beyond that, because I know a lot of people who have spent a lot of time and gotten very, very anxious about, their personal statement isn't compelling enough. And most people's personal statements, just so you know, are not that compelling. They're fine. They're okay. They're good. Some are better than others, but unless it's really badly written, your personal statement is probably not going to make the difference between getting admitted and not getting admitted. Let's go back to why you might want to take an LL.M. And I've mentioned some of these things earlier. Step back and take a breath. If you've been working for several years, you probably find that you have no time to think, no time to reflect on what you're doing or where you are in sort of the path of that you want to be on for your career and your life. So it's a great break. it's a great way to learn legal English. Okay, Bruna's program is fantastic, but if you really want to learn legal English, you got to come to a law school in an English-speaking country. Learn US law. That may seem sort of obvious, but you will be working with clients and co-counsel and opposing counsel from US firms and US companies, and you really need to have an understanding of US law in order to be able to do that effectively and to understand the common law. Why? Because the common law and the civil law, they kind of approach things from very different perspectives. So at the end, we may all reach more or less the same result, but we're coming at it a very different way. And I think to the extent that you can understand how a common law lawyer, in particular, from my view, a US lawyer approaches legal issues, you can really, I think, work with those people much more effectively. See how we think. By the way, when you're looking at a program, one thing I didn't mention is that I think you want to be in a program where US and international students are studying side by side. In most programs, there'll be a class or two where you're segregated. I teach Introduction to the US Legal System at Fordham for our incoming international students. You won't have trained lawyers in that class, but in all your other classes, you will. And I think that's really, really important, not only for your network, but also to develop a sense of how we think about things and approach legal issues that's kind of different from how you might. Improve your job prospects, both in the US and if you were to go back to Brazil or go someplace else. An LL.M is a really, really good credential. It doesn't mean you're going to automatically get a job at the top firm in New York, but I would say that it would be virtually impossible to get a job at a top firm in New York without the LL.M. And if you network, we'll talk about networking a little bit, you can really, you can try to get a job in the US. Many, many people get jobs in the US, but it will also, I think, improve your job prospects back in Brazil. I think when you go back to Brazil, especially for the very large Brazilian firms and the US and UK and other large international firms, that is, if not a prerequisite, it's something that would be highly beneficial. Develop your adaptability and flexibility. I'll tell you that when I was 20 years old, just a few years ago, I studied abroad, and it completely opened the world for me in ways that I could never have imagined. And most people that I talk to that study abroad feel the same. It really develops a sense of adaptability and flexibility. It allows you to refine your cultural competence, because let's face it, I know we all talk about globalization, but we are in a globalized world. We will be working with people from all over the world. So what happens when you're in your LL.M program is not only will you have students from other Latin American countries and the US, but from places where you never met people. Okay, you've probably met Spaniards and French and Germans and Italians, but there'll be people from sub-Saharan Africa. There'll be people from the Emirates and Jordan and Egypt and Israel and India and Pakistan. And, it'll really teach you about the world. Networking, what does this mean? It means building relationships. And so the LL.M, I think, provides you with an incredible opportunity to meet lawyers and other people from the US and from around the world. And this is, by the way, not only personally really enriching, but when you go back and you're at your firm and they say, gee, we really need a lawyer from China, your hand goes up and you say, I had a classmate, he does IP in China, let me call him. Or, just today I reached out to someone in China to see if he could introduce me to someone at a different Chinese firm, right? And so it becomes this network that's very valuable personally, but also very valuable to you professionally. And I guess the last reason, which maybe is the first reason, is that it's an amazing experience from a personal and a professional experience. And, I see this, I've been working with international LL.M students probably for about 25 years, and I see them come in and I see them leave, and I see the transformation in their lives and their vision and how they see the world and how they see themselves after this year. I don't think I can understate the impact that this time would have on you. And I know Vinicius has done his LL.M in the US, and maybe he wants to later talk a little bit about that experience. So let me tell you a little bit about the programs we have at Fordham, and then I'll open it up for questions or comments or thoughts. At Fordham, you could start either in August or in January. And we have these 9 different areas of specialization: banking, corporate and finance law, corporate compliance, which I think is pretty big in Brazil. We know why. I think that's a really growing area of law in Brazil. Fashion law, intellectual property and information technology law, international business and trade law, international dispute resolution, international law and justice, real estate law, and US law. US law and corporate compliance can also be done online. Important point about the online LLM program is that you will not be eligible to sit for the New York bar if you take your LLM online. And a lot of people who graduate from US LLM programs do sit for the New York bar. So that's a really, really important caveat. We have two other programs that you might think of before of or possibly instead of the LLM. The first is the Legal English Institute. And this is the program that Bruna Marchi's in. We also have a judge from Brazil, but now I can't remember where she's from. So never mind. In the program, I think she's enjoying it a lot. It's basically an introduction to US legal system and US law with a focus on legal English. It's a full semester program that runs from August to December or January through May, much like the LLM. It meets online for the next semester. So if you were to start this program in August through December, it's going to be online. I'm not sure what we're going to do after that, but it's online for now, and it meets morning New York time. So you're either usually the same time as us or maybe an hour ahead. So it's mornings. I love this program, and this is a program that's a great introduction for those of you who are thinking of doing an LLM down the road. I will tell you something very special that we're doing right now for friends like you who show up at events like this. If you do the Legal English Institute and then you do the LLM, you register for the LLM afterwards, we'll give you back the money that you paid for the Legal English Institute by way of an additional scholarship to the LLM program. So it's kind of like, we know that if you try us, you'll really love us and you'll stay on. So that's something that is just an added incentive that might be interesting for you. The other program is the Summer Institute. Klaus is going to be with us this summer. It runs from July 6th to August 5th. I think I have those dates right. Again, it meets online, mornings, New York time. It's a little bit less intensive than the Legal English Institute. The Summer Institute doesn't have exams or papers. The Legal English Institute is actually a pretty intensive, demanding program. I would be pleased to tell you more about either of those. Here is my name again, my title, my email address, and my blog. I blog. My other passion is talking and writing about something that I call your legal professional persona. And I blog here, and I would be very pleased if any of you did check out my blog to hear your thoughts about it. So Klaus, I hope that was okay and a good place to stop and maybe see what questions your colleagues have.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was definitely super good. I was super excited to learn about all of these possibilities. And once again, I wanted to thank you for your time, for having just for taking the time to come and meet with us. It was definitely super cool. Thanks also for sharing about the Summer Institute. I was very happy to learn this last week that I was a winner, I guess that's the name you call it. I don't know, of the Thiago Barbarisi scholarship. And I guess Toni later can speak a little bit about who Thiago is and why they even have a scholarship to honor his memory. So thanks a lot, and let's move on to the questions. Yeah, I see that Bruna Souza already sent here a question, so if we could start with hers. So she's asking, is it, yeah,
no, please.
And if I may read it out loud then,
please.
Is it common for universities in the US to offer scholarships? Super good question.
I know the suspense is killing you, and it's a great question. And the answer, Bruna, is yes. And this has changed a little bit in recent years. Today, virtually every US law school offers scholarships. We have to. And it's actually a great competitive market for you guys right now, because, Bruna, let's imagine that you apply to Fordham and 2 other schools, and you get admitted to all 3. And let's say that we've given you $10,000 in scholarship money, and another school has given you $20,000 in scholarship money, but you really want to come to Fordham. what you would do, and everybody's doing this, you shouldn't feel embarrassed about it, is you come back to us and you'd say, look, Fordham is my first choice, but I was given X at another school. Now, we don't necessarily match other schools. In fact, I think a lot of people do expect that we're going to match other schools. We may, but we don't always, right? I'm not going to match a school that I think is far inferior. I'm not going to recommend to the committee that we do that, because there's real value in certain schools and less value, I think, in others. But you should always come back to us. We're always going to try. If a student says to us, Fordham is my first choice, and we've admitted you, we're going to try to work it out. Okay, if you want to be there and we want you to be there, we're going to try to work it out with you. So there are scholarships. Schools are increasingly generous about their scholarships, and you should always ask. You shouldn't be embarrassed, and it's very, very common to get scholarships. So thank you. That was a great question that probably all of your counterparts have on the call as well. Yeah, you should bargain with us. It sounds kind of funny, but you should bargain with us.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, kind of the last generation of LL.Ms, the people who are currently on social media speaking about their experiences, they didn't have scholarships. And they're often saying like, hey guys, if you want to do like medicine or law in the US, you can't get scholarships. And I'm so happy to have this good news, but how I'm just a young man who haven't done an LL.M yet. I don't have kind of the credentials to be the one saying like, hey, scholarships are available. It's true. So I'm so happy to have you who have all the credentials to confirm my message.
It's absolutely true. And it's also quite true that this is a relatively recent phenomenon in the sense that back in the day, a few really amazing students would get scholarships. Now they're much more widely available. So Bruno's given me a hand clap. I feel very good about that. And I always like to say that. And look, let me say something while I'm thinking of it. There are 15 of you on this call. I'm really pleased that you're here. When you apply to Fordham, if you do apply to Fordham, send an email to me first and remind me, remember that lecture you gave with Klaus and you had banging in the background because someone was doing construction in your building somewhere. I was there, and that's why I'm applying to Fordham, and put my name in the application. It says, how did you learn about Fordham? This means something to me that you're here thinking about the LL.M program. So I would really, really appreciate that. And we're going to always do our best for people who sort of show up at things like this. This is really, really terrific. So the next question, Vinicius, shall I read it, Klaus, or do you want to read it?
I can read it. So
Please.
Okay, so let me go up a little bit. So how LL.M graduates can fit in the US market. The challenge is not being able to fit as an associate in a law firm for not having a JD and overqualified for non-attorney positions.
Yeah, this is a great question. Look, I want to be very clear that the LL.M is a great credential, and there are many, many LL.M graduates that I know working in New York and elsewhere in the U.S., but mainly in New York at top firms. The firms that you've heard of, really, really big American, English, Spanish firms, and so on and so forth. But it is not to say that you get an LL.M and then you become, everybody's running after you. That's not true. And so what I like to say, Vinicius, is that you're never going to be JD students unless you do a JD degree. A JD degree is when you meet a US lawyer like me, and any US lawyer you meet, 99% of them are going to be JD holders, the Juris Doctor. That's the standard law degree in the US. Now, if you want, as an international attorney, to do the JD, you could apply for and do the JD. It's 3 years, so it's a lot longer than the LL.M. But what I would say is that LL.Ms are not seen as the same as JDs, but I don't think it's that they're less or more. They're just really different, right? And so the key, I think, for LL.M graduates is to exploit what they bring, because they do lack something that the other, someone like me has. So what did I have when I graduated from law school? I had native English. I had native cultural competence, right, which is something. I had 3 years of US law school. And that's sort of, for US employers, that's kind of normal, right? I fit into what their expectations are. in some ways. Now, you're something different, right? So you have to sort of figure out, okay, I'm not native English speaker. My English is great, but I'm not a native speaker. I don't have native US cultural competence because I've only lived here for a year. And I studied law for a year. But then again, Toni doesn't know anything about the civil law system. Toni doesn't know anything about Portuguese language other than how the queijo caipirinha. Toni doesn't know about the civil law. Toni doesn't know the Brazilian legal market. Toni doesn't know this. Toni doesn't know how to do trade in Brazil and so on and so forth, right? So what you should be doing is looking for jobs where you really add value. And these jobs exist. So a friend of mine who's a former student from, let me just say that she's from one of the Magic Circle British firms, but she's a partner in the New York office of this British firm. She wrote to me and she said, quick, I need a Spanish speaker with 4 or 5 years of merger and acquisition experience. No JD student would fit that, right? No JD graduate would, 1 in a million maybe, right? But you guys, that's something you can fit, right? And so you don't want to compete head on for the ordinary jobs that JDs are looking for. You want to look for jobs where your language, cultural knowledge of civil law, knowledge of Brazilian law, and knowledge of Spanish and Portuguese languages will really come into play, because that's something that I couldn't do. So I would say you're neither better nor worse than JDs. You're different. It's probably a little bit more challenging for you guys to find work. You have to hustle a little bit more because JD is, again, the norm, right? And so when people are leaving law schools, employers sort of know what they are, and that's where they get their pool of people. You have to really work on meeting people who are in a position to help you identify positions for which you are uniquely qualified. Does that help a little bit?
Yes,
come
it does.
Come on.
Yes.
Okay, Bruna, de nada. What kind of ability is Fordham looking for in the Tiago Scholarship? So I hope that means that some of you will apply for the Tiago Scholarship next year. I'm sorry that Klaus has already claimed it for this year, but it is awarded every year for the summer program to a Brazilian, usually a youngish Brazilian. Let me tell you about Tiago. Tiago was a student in the First Summer Institute in 2007, I want to say. Can that possibly be? Yeah, maybe. And you may have heard the story, although you're all pretty young, I guess. You may or may not have heard the story. The summer after, he was actually coming back for the second summer to sort of work in the program with us. And he was killed in a car accident, along with the accident involved Sibella Dorsey, who since died, but not from the accident. She was an actress and a model. And it was obviously very heartbreaking. He was a young guy. And he was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I was very close to him, and I became close to his family. And so we established a scholarship in his memory. And my hope is that even when I'm gone from Fordham, 20 years from now, that we will keep being able to offer the scholarship for one student every year. So what gets me, I'll tell you what gets me. When I see that what I care about in the application is that the person, and when I meet the person, so that's why we did interviews on the phone, because I wanted to make sure we got this right. I look for someone with heart. I look for someone who reminds me of Tiago in some way. I look for someone that I feel like, so Klaus, I hope you aren't blushing too much, but someone who's not just a smart lawyer or law student, but someone who brings a sense of heart and soul with him or her, who's more than a law student or a young lawyer. And I have to say, one thing that shocks me in this process, we get a lot of applications. Very few people mention Tiago in their personal statement. Don't not mention Tiago in your personal statement. Say something about Tiago. I love Tiago. I want to give this to someone who at least knows who Tiago is and looked him up and has a sense of who this guy was. Please mention Tiago in your essay. I don't want to say that if you don't mention Tiago, you don't have any chance, but I think it's really weird when I read an essay for the scholarship and someone didn't mention Tiago. So try to learn a little bit about Tiago and understand a little bit about who he was and who he meant to people, and show me that you're the kind of person who could make such an impact on others. I think that's what I would say. Thank you for that. I'll just keep going if that's okay, Bruno. If you don't mind explaining a little bit further what we consider to be the main points of an LL.M application in terms of experience. In Brazil, master and postgraduate programs extremely valuable academic backgrounds, such as publications and research experience. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so if you've published, that's amazing. Okay, if you've done research, that's amazing. For me, it's just as, if not more impressive, that you've worked at some law firm or worked in a company or worked at the government. So, or built something like Klaus has, right? So if you've done a really cool research project, that's great. But it's no more of particular value to me than you had a job at Matos Filho, or you were an intern at Demarest, or I'm just naming the firms I know, it doesn't matter. You know, you were at Venero, whatever, it doesn't matter. So research is nice, publications are super nice, but work experience is also good. And I would say that that's a real advantage that Brazilians have time, but the fact that you do internships and legal positions when you're still in school gives you a nice resume even before you've graduated, which some students in other countries don't bring that at all. So that's really a nice advantage that you have. Super, that's a great question. You know, I feel like what I want to see when I look at an application is a couple of things. I want to see, first of all, that the person has done something, okay? Very rarely we see an application from someone, they may have spectacular grades, but they've never done an internship, they've never been part of a student group, all they did was study. I'm not that interested in that person. I want to see a little bit more. So your studies matter, but I want to see that you have another dimension to you, that you're not just sort of an egghead sitting in the library that no one's going to be friends with. I want to see that you're a person who engages with others, who knows what it's like to work in a professional setting, because what we say about law school in the US is it's a professional school, which means a couple of things. It means that it leads to a profession, right? A licensure that enables you to engage in a profession. But it also means that we're professionals at this point. You're not students anymore. You are professionals. I will treat you that way. The law school will treat you that way. And that's the way you should approach your studies. So that's, I think, the way you should approach the application process as well. Obrigada. I was just looking to see if there were other questions. Yeah, I think we've covered it, Klaus.
Yes, a great job. You know, it's been a really great hour. It has been just amazing to hear all this valuable advice from you. And I'm so happy we are recording this, because I'll have to review it several times, go over it, and, kind of make a journal out of this Zoom call. So once again, Toni, I hope this was just the beginning of a great partnership to come. Thank you so much for having the willingness to join us. I hope you will enjoy your walk in the nice weather of New York right now. It will always be a pleasure to host you here. So once again, thanks a lot for making the effort to be here with us.
It's a pleasure, Klaus. The honor is mine. And I want to thank all of you for showing up. I know that you have lots and lots of things to do, and it's getting late already. So I really, really appreciate it. I hope that everyone, please stay safe, and do reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Bruno, I see you're going to apply for International Law and Justice program. That makes me so happy. Please do feel free to use me as a resource. Connect with me on LinkedIn, but I prefer email if you want to be in touch. And Klaus, I hope you'll invite me back again.
I definitely will. We'll see each other again soon. Thanks a lot.
I hope so. Muito obrigada e boa noite. Tchau.
Muito obrigado a todos que participaram, gente. Obrigadão, hein?